Hello and welcome to Collapse Club, where our topic is, how shall we live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle. Today, I am joined by Michael Dowd from Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David. Good to be with you, brother.
Michael is an educator, communicator, historian, philosopher, clergyman, and seeker after truth. You, Michael, have done an enormous amount of work under the rubric post-doom at postdoom.com. There are hundreds of resources and videos and all manner of resources. I want to start with a meta question. Why are you working so hard?
Well, I actually don't experience it. Interesting question, the phrase that way, because I don't experience it as work, and I certainly don't experience it as hard work. You know, skunks just stink naturally. And Michael Dowd just does this kind of stuff. It's like it's effortless. I have a passion. I'm an independent scholar, so over the years I've studied. I take a body of research, and then I just like spend a few years just immersed in the topic, reading everything I possibly can, and I did that beginning in December 2012 with regards to abrupt climate change and the rise and fall of civilizations and collapse and all this kind of stuff. And so I spend 20, 30, 40 sometimes hours a week, sometimes more, reading and recording. I've recorded, I don't know, 1,000 hours of books and papers and posts and stuff. And that's just what I do. And when I read something that I consider almost like scripture, like secular scripture, like this is so fucking inspiring, I just want everybody to experience it, I record it. I call the publisher, I call the author, I get their permission, and then I record it. And I when I'm moved to tears by somebody's generosity of soul, as I was William Catton's book Overshoot, I leave the mic on. You can hear me weeping. You can hear Connie crying on the couch, and I repeat really great paragraphs. So it doesn't occur to me as work. It occurs to me as, this is what I was born to do. This is what I am gifted to do. I love making information dense, deep time, ecological and evolutionary and climate related science understandable to people, and especially the practical side of it, helping people to get clear on why we're in the mess we are. And then, so that usually evaporates the blame game, because then it's like, oh, of course, when they understand the history and the ecology of it, and then get clear in terms of how love motivates them to be in action. So yeah, like, good question, but I don't actually experience it as working hard at all. I can't not do it.
What is it that we need to learn now?
Wow. I don't know that I would phrase it as we need to, so much as we get to if we want to have a great life in the midst of inescapable collapse, unstoppable collapse, quite possibly the relatively near-term extinction of, at least functional extinction of, at least 98% of our species, if not 100%. We just don't know. But how do you survive? How do you thrive? How do you have joy and gratitude and love and compassion and generosity and be a blessing to your community and be a blessing to others in the midst of things happening in the world where everything is circling the drain, where we're collapsing socially, economically, climate-wise, food-wise, energy-wise, and so forth. So I think the things that we need to learn to not go crazy would be ecology and history, understanding the ecological worldview that William Catton, for example, in his book Overshoot provides. And if you don't have that, if you don't understand the ecological paradigm, it's very difficult to trust what's inevitable, to trust collapse. The ecological paradigm provides everything.
Why is it important to have that ecological perspective? What changes does that make in how you live?
Well, the biggest one is you realize, oh my God, of course we're collapsing. And of course, there's no technological solution or market-based solution or techno fixes. I mean, it's like those become so obvious, the delusion that technology in the market can save us from what technology in the market are the primary cause of. It becomes obvious when you understand the ecological paradigm, when you understand the way the living world, that is our biophysical, living creator, sustainer, and end. Whether you use divine or secular language for that reality, it doesn't matter. But that reality is primary. We're derivative. We emerge out of that. And so we either live in right relationship to primary reality or we suffer. And we've been living out of right relationship to reality. When I say we, most Western, well, anthropocentric civilizations, human-centered civilizations, have lived out of right relationship to reality for 6 or 7 or 8,000 years, depending upon where you talk about. So it's like, of course, we can't become sustainable. Of course, that Green New Deals aren't going to save us. That more technology, whether it's wind turbines or solar panels, all that's going to do is make things worse, and it's going to really create depression among young people.
So that sounds like that's the inevitable part. What's the trust part? What are we to trust in?
Life. Faith in God is just a mythic way of saying trust in life as it really is, not as you wish it was. You know, accepting reality, trusting the universe, celebrating what's so, accepting, the isness of things. All these are different ways of saying trusting what is unstoppable, what's inevitable, what's just the way things are, trusting the way things are. And we've been so immersed in human-centered interpretations of what really matters that most of us are what I call biosphere blind and divine deaf. Biosphere blind, meaning we don't understand the biosphere and how everything we need to do as humans must support that and preserve the well-being of the biosphere. And we're divine deaf because we think of God as either otherworldly or non-existent. And atheism and theism are equally ecocidal in the sense that they both treat the biosphere as an it to be exploited rather than a thou to be honored and respected.
So it sounds like trust then is an act of surrender, surrendering the anthropocentric, ego-driven purpose or intention or control, surrendering to something or someone. Am I on the track?
Kind of. It's as long as we recognize that our brains are programmed evolutionarily for personification, for giving human characteristics to what's more than human. And so Gaia is not the goddess of the earth or the spirit of the earth. Gaia is a personification of earth. Poseidon is a personification of the oceans. Eros is a personification of love or lust. And so in that sense, that if we don't have an I-thou respectful, reverential relationship to the living world, we're sunk. There's never been an anthropocentric culture in the history of in the history of our world. We have over 100 examples. There's never been a human-centered civilization that hasn't self-destructed, or you've been wiped out by a volcano or whatever. And ecocentric, life-centered civilization, not civilizations, life-centered cultures, because usually they're not city-based civilizations, but life-centered cultures, that's the definition of genuine sustainability. That is, it preserves the well-being of the systems that they require for them to survive and thrive. So the water systems, the soil systems, the other species, that's preserved as a sacred responsibility. And we haven't been doing that for thousands of years. And there's a reason why no unsustainable civilization has ever become sustainable. It can't be done for very well-known laws of physics, biology, and ecology. And yet that's precisely what the billion-dollar corporations are trying to sell young people on. Young activists are being encouraged to fight for a Green New Deal and solar panels and wind turbines and all the rest of it. And all that's going to do definitely is make things worse. It has to make things worse. And so it ultimately leads to despair.
Thank you for that. Let me mention, when your microphone moves around, it bangs on your chest. So if you immobilize, there we go.
Yes, there we go.
Okay, we'll keep track of that. The I-thou relationship with reality, with what is beyond ourselves, that sounds like you call it faith in God, or is it a personal relationship?
The trust in the universe, just trust in the universe. I mean, it's accepting what's so and saying yes to what is. And it's simply a pragmatic affair. You don't have to do that, but you're going to have a lot less frustration and depression and angst and despair about what's really going on in our real world if you simply say yes to life as it really is. It's like that old, 12-step serenity prayer that was actually penned by Reinhold Niebuhr in the 1960s. But, God, life, reality. Let me have the serenity to accept the things that are, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So accepting things as they are, especially given the fact that we have abundant evidence, like boatloads of evidence of the rise and fall of civilizations. And we're in the fall side. We're on the downside. That's an inescapable fact.
I'm sorry, the microphone.
Okay, I'm taking, yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't know what.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. I don't
There
want
we go. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay, I'm probing here, but my background is totally non-institutional, which is to say I call myself a feral mystic, which simply means that I have my own experiential sort of relationship with reality on a spiritual basis. I mean, a lot of people do. I'm not special in that way, but I'm very interested in, I've heard you describe God or use words to label the idea of God as reality with a personality. And that's a brilliant turn of phrase to start. And I wonder if you could go into that a little bit and talk about the personality of reality.
Yeah. Well, the personality of reality is whatever any individual or group of individuals do. It's an entire act of projection in the sense of we are imagining life having a human-like characteristic that we call a personality. But what we do know from history is that only cultures that had a personal relationship to reality were motivated to preserve the well-being of the air, the water, the soil, the life upon which they depend. Without a personal, when we treat the living reality, the living God, G, Earth emoji D, as you know the way I do it, when we treat our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end as merely an it, a secular it to be exploited, basically a larder and a toilet, a place for our waste, we will always self-destruct. Those kinds of cultures always commit ecocide. And so, yeah, my creed, as you may have heard, my creed, sort of my 6-point faith statement, you could say, this is my belief, my worldview in a nutshell. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. The epic of evolution is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And promoting accountability to the future, right relationship to reality, is my mission. And so I phrase it that way because that can be interpreted in either religious language or secular language. It really doesn't matter. But when I say reality is my God, it means that's my ultimate concern. My ultimate commitment is to reality itself as evidentially revealed. And the history of the universe, the epic of evolution, or big history, or the universe story is my creation story that science tells us, that evidence tells us, which is global collective intelligence. And then ecology is my theology. And by integrity, I mean the practices that help me live in right relationship to reality. And so I also consider myself, I like the language you use. I call myself an evidential mystic. I'm a religious naturalist, an evidential mystic. That is, evidence helps me have a more intimate, personal relationship to reality.
Okay, the reality we find ourselves in can be kind of disturbing if you look at it from a certain point of view. The reason I asked you to talk on this topic was I was in one of your post-doom discussion groups. There was a young man who was upset and fearful and angry and sad, and he was talking very energetically about conspiracy theories and evil actors who are bringing the world to an end or to a bad place. And your response was to calm him by suggesting that he trust what is inevitable. And he was calmed, and the group was cohered, and we could go on. What do we do about the bad news? We trust the inevitable. The inevitable looks kind of grim. Where does that put us, and how are we supposed to react?
Yeah, great question, David. So there are subjective and objective things that are inevitable. And the video that I've created, I've spent probably 12,000 hours studying all this stuff over the last 9 years. And my attempt to compress the essence of all of that into one video was a video titled 10 Inevitables, Post-Doom, No Gloom. And I have 3 versions. An appetizer version, which is like 33 minutes, a mid-sized meal, 50 minutes. And then the 2-hour all-you-can-eat buffet version is really the one I recommend. And I just rewatched it this morning in preparation for this conversation. And my thought was, damn, I think I did a great job on that, because it really discusses 10 things that are not only inevitable, but that are evidentially inevitable. But if we don't accept them as inevitable, we're going to be frustrated. We're going to be depressed. We're going to be overwhelmed. And so I think it's really important to recognize that there are also internal subjective. For example, the first, can I just read these quick 10 sentences?
Of course. Thank you. Yes.
So the 10 inevitables, number 1, most people will have a hard time trusting how and why our civilization is collapsing. Most people have a hard time because we just are not taught that. And we're collapsing because of ecological overshoot of carrying capacity. That's why the issue isn't climate change. So number 2, abrupt climate mayhem, which is like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime, a rapid 2 degrees Celsius or more, locks in biospheric collapse and extinctions. The third, inevitability, is that tipping points already crossed will be falsely framed as still avoidable. We see this happening in the IPCC. We see it among all over the place, is that tipping points that are actually 20 years in the rearview mirror, we talk about them as if we could still avoid them. It's crazy. It's hopium. Number 4, without assisted migration, love, and action, most tree species will go extinct. Now, it's quite possible that most tree species are going to go extinct anyway, but we can increase the odds of at least some species making it by assisting them in migrating poleward faster than any other animal can move their seeds. Number 5, without urgent collective action, there will be dozens of nuclear meltdowns. Now, again, there may be dozens of nuclear meltdowns anyway, but we at least increase the odds of less nuclear meltdowns if we take urgent action collectively. Number 6, as our biospheric and societal predicament worsens, so will our mental health. Now, that doesn't mean each individual. My mental health has actually increased. I'm more at peace and I have more gratitude and more joy on a day-by-day basis because I understand ecology and history, the rise and fall of civilizations. But collectively, we will see addictions ramp up and mental health problems of all kinds ramp up. And Plato talked about this 2,500 years ago. Number 7, most people will only reluctantly relinquish their faith in the almighty we. This idea that we can do this and we can do that. And if we all just become vegan, or if we all stop flying, or if we all vote in the right people, it's the almighty we. And most people will have a hard time letting go of that. Number 8, if you proselytize only the doom side of reality, of collapse reality, expect to be shunned. I mean, Guy McPherson has experienced this in spades. I mean, nobody has been more reviled and attacked because he basically is saying what nobody else had the courage to say, or nobody else knew enough to say it, which is we're looking at unstoppable collapse and quite possibly the extinction of our species in the near term. Number 9, most people will crave distraction and virtually anything that offers hope. I don't need to say anything about that. And number 10, where there's addicts, there's going to be suppliers. So number 10 is elite universities, the IPCC, mainstream media, politicians, and New York Times bestselling authors will remain first-rate legal opium dealers. So those things that I suggest, and I go into great depth. I mean, my 2-hour video on 10 Inevitables is divided into 6 20-minute segments, and it's designed to tell people, I say, stop at each 20-minute, relax, rest, go pour yourself a stiff one if you need to. But accepting these as truly inevitable allows for a joy of living and a peace of mind that doesn't come if you're resisting or resenting these things that are inevitable. I apologize. There's a lawnmower outside, so if you can hear that, I apologize.
No, we're okay. Thank you. Joy of living and peace of mind. That's the result of trusting what is inevitable.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I so appreciated your conversation with Karen with both Jordan and Karen Perry, but Karen's work on the benefits of collapse acceptance and really the benefits of collapse trust. She identifies 15. You had in the comment section, I noticed, of your YouTube channel there for this call, the 7 that I have. But those are, I mean, so oftentimes we focus on the doomy side. And no, there are benefits that are only possible if we truly accept, not just collapse awareness, but collapse acceptance. And then beyond that, collapse trust. And that usually takes an ecological and historical understanding to get to trust.
Okay, this is very interesting. I'm familiar with collapse acceptance. I think I understand what that means. But then there's a step beyond collapse trust. And I think that may correlate with doom and post-doom as well, your larger framework.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I wonder if you could talk about the step from acceptance to trust and from doom to post-doom.
Oh, David, great question. I think the key is recognizing the inevitability of a lot of this. I mean, once we put ourselves as a species onto a path where we were mining metals, Andy Schmuckler's famous book, The Parable of the Tribes, talks about that. Once we could mine metals and have a domination mindset 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, we almost guaranteed we would end up where we are now. In fact, Jack Forbes, the Native American, the amazing Native American scholar who wrote this book, Columbus and Other Cannibals, I think it's backward, but Columbus and Other Cannibals, it's about Wetiko. It's about the sickness of mind and the virus of the mind and the virus of values that come with human-centeredness rather than life-centeredness. And so this inevitability for 6,000 or 7,000, 8,000 years is such that when you really get that, it allows you to not just accept collapse, but to see that, oh my God, this was baked in the cake millennia ago, not just decades ago. It's not the fault of this group or that group or this group or that group. So clarity tends to replace confusion when you really understand the ecological and the historical grounding of this. Clarity replaces confusion. Blame is replaced with compassion in most cases, because you start having compassion for people that just yesterday or last week you judged and blamed as being the problem. Now realize, oh my gosh, we're all in this together, which is not to say there's not sociopaths and psychopaths and evil corporations and all that. There is. But nonetheless, we can have that blame replaced with compassion. And then clarity with respect to love and action. And I prefer, as you know, I prefer love and action to activism, because it's where does love motivate you to be in action? So many times activism is still desperate and panicked and fearful and judgmental. And all of that can evaporate when you really get the historical and ecological foundation. That's why I keep coming back to that.
So we find ourselves embedded in an historical phenomenon and a way of being as human beings that lead us into this grim situation. And it's inevitable, it sounds like, that we will play it out to its end. Why is this happening? Why are we destined, if you will, or doomed? I know that's loaded, but why are we here? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, thanks. I won't go to, I won't do the actual, I won't read I've got 3 definitions of doom and 3 definitions of post-doom on the post-doom website. So I encourage folks to just check out postdoom.com and read the 3 definitions of doom and post-doom. But to come back to your question, it really, I think, is human-centeredness rather than life-centeredness. Once we took that path, and I say we, I mean, obviously there are indigenous cultures that never took that path. But once the vast majority of humanity did, we put ourselves on a ecocidal trajectory that pretty much became unstoppable. And when you realize that, I don't experience any longer the anguish and the anger and the fear and the direness. It's like, oh, this is what is truly unstoppable. This is truly thousands of years in the making, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. There's things we can do locally to help soften the cushion and to alleviate suffering. So there's a lot that we can do that can be a blessing to our communities and our neighborhoods and our perhaps counties and cities and whatever, but there's nothing that we can do to slow, stop, or reverse the collapse of the biosphere, the collapse of civilization. And that's the piece that when people get, that's why Guy McPherson keeps focusing on tipping points. When people get the unstoppability of tipping points, that once we've passed a tipping point, it's kind of like, could you imagine trying to stop the World Trade Towers? We've all seen those images of the collapse of the World Trade Towers. Well, we can't stop that. Well, the only difference between the collapse of a biosphere and the collapse of an ecosystem and the collapse of the trade towers is the speed. It's just as unstoppable. And so when we get that, then we realize, okay, in my remaining weeks, months, years, if we're lucky, decades, but I doubt that, in our remaining time, how can I be present to the suffering of others so I can alleviate that to some degree or help to? How can I be present to the majesty? I'm alive. I have consciousness. I can still be grateful. It's awestruck with this fucking amazing world in which we live. So how do we stay present to that and support each other in that kind of nature mysticism or evidential mysticism or, whatever? That's what I want to focus the rest of my life on. And especially, and I want to make sure I make this point because I've been dealing with this a lot lately, how do we become adults? We are surrounded, especially men in this culture, civilization, we are surrounded by men who are not men. They're not adults. They're still adolescents. They're still feeding their addictions. They're numbing their pain. They're not taking responsibility. They're playing blame game. Adults do whatever it takes to be a blessing to the children and to the families and to ensure that the children have as little suffering as possible. And one of the things that means is we don't foist all of our doom on young people. That's bullshit. So I want to have young families, children, and youth live life fully and love the life they live as long as they've got, even though it's probably not long, but without the fear and the terror and the judgment and the blame that so many of us so-called adults that are actually adolescents are carrying. So that's why there's sort of move to have a rite of passage, I think. We need a cultural rite of passage. And that's not going to happen without an ecological understanding and without a historical understanding.
So you're looking forward to a change of some kind, a shift, an evolution, or as you say, a rite of passage. Can you describe that? Where we're going, or what you imagine, or what you envision for that blessing of a change?
Sure. I think it's mostly inner. When I look at what's truly out of our control already, the tipping points that are already in unstoppable runaway mode, such as the burning of the forests of the world. If human beings, there's all this sort of, intense energy in reducing emissions. We can't reduce emissions. If every human being died tonight and there were no human beings and industrial activity completely stopped, carbon and methane would continue to rise inexorably because the forests of the world are already in runaway burning. Over the next few decades, most of the forests of the world will burn. The peat, the permafrost. So all of that's in runaway mode. And so I don't think we're in a great turning in terms of like civilization. I think it's probably more likely that there'll be, maybe 70 million humans in pockets around the world, or maybe no humans. We just can't know. But we're going to see a radical trimming down of all mammals, most vertebrates, most humans, most plants and animals, and trees in the coming decade or two. It's that fast. So how do we stay present with compassion and generosity and love and kindness and consideration in the midst of that kind of inevitability? And I think that's vital. And I don't want to give a litany of other things that are in runaway mode, but the loss of the coral reefs, there's just so much, the ice in the Arctic, there's so many things that are already in runaway mode. So how to support each other and having as much joy, as much gratitude, as much peace of mind and heart in the midst of that. Well, that's what post-doom is all about. All the resources on my post-doom website, all the 85 conversations, the post-doom conversations that I've had with top people all over the world, it's all about helping people to understand what's real and kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, here's what's real. Now, what's possible? And to live in that place of possibility. And that's really what evolution is. Evolution isn't betterment. I used to think it was. Evolution isn't greater complexity forever. Evolution is adapting to what's real. And we could very well, we probably are already so far gone that there's a massive simplification of life. But in 10 or 20 million years, life will rebound. But we humans probably will not be part of that. And how can we be with that with hearts of gratitude for the fact that we're alive now and we get to assist trees in migrating, that we get to try to cap the nukes to preserve as, have as few nuclear meltdowns as possible. Just because we can't save everything doesn't mean there's not a hell of a lot of great things we can do.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for your emotion, brother. I mean, this is one of the most important things. I was on a 2-hour call with Joanna Macy, one of my great mentors yesterday. There were another 2,000 people were also on the call. But it was talking about climate change as spiritual practice. And really, this is the time for us to share our anguish, our grief, our sadness, our anger with each other. Because only in the sharing of that with each other, then can it evaporate to the place of compassion and generosity. But if we keep it bottled up and pretend that we got it together, or smoke the opium pipe and hope that technology is going to make it, then we're just going to make things worse. So I appreciate your heart. In fact, on some of your other interviews, I've noticed you allow your emotions to be there. And I deeply honor you for that, brother.
Thank you so much. I have good days and I have bad days. Some days I'm, on a path of blissful acceptance of, ultimate serenity. Other days I'm freaking out about, am I going to make it to the evening, because my back hurts and gosh, do I have a heart condition and, all that. Just, So my question is, where do we look to for strength, for renewal of our love and our compassion, even as we read the news, which is getting more and more intense?
Yeah. To use mythic language, where we look is God, but not an otherworldly being, not a supernatural being. God, G, earth emoji, D. That is, we look to life. And the more you can do to fall in love with life, the life in your front yard, your backyard, your bioregion, your area, anything that you can do to increase your intimacy with the land, the soil, the water, the species surrounding you, the clouds, everything, anything that we can do to be fed by the biosphere, by life, by Gaia, if you want to use that name. But anything we can do, that's where we can find nourishment and strength. And those authors and poets and whatever that help us to grow in an intimate relationship with life as it really is are going to be some of our most important inspirational sources, I think. And each other. One of the things we've known for countless generations, but we're learning it in a new way, is the greatest source of happiness is to look to others and find a way to be a contribution, to be a blessing, to in some way contribute to someone or something else. It can be another species. It doesn't have to be other humans, but anything that we can do to be a contribution, a compassionate, generous contribution or a blessing to someone or something else will nurture us deeply.
Thank you for that. And I think with those words, we'll move toward the end. I'd like to recommend that everyone check out your website, postdoom.com. It is a huge repository of information and resources, and people may find something there that they will find very useful to them. Finally, what's coming up for you when you look at the next days or weeks? What are you looking forward to?
Well, before I even tell you what there is, I just want to mention that the problem with my Postdoom website is there's too much stuff. And so on the resources page, I actually have like 3 or 4 videos. And I say these, if you only have time for a few videos or a few text or a few things, so check out the resource page where I try to make that easy for folks. But to answer your question, it's Anjali, my 2-year-old granddaughter. Everything and anything that I can do to increase the trust and the love in her life and her parents, my daughter and my son-in-law, is a reason for being, for me to live, you know? So I just spent the last month being with my mother in Miami, who's not doing well health-wise. It's probably the last time I'll ever see my mother before she dies. My father in New York, 85 years old, also not doing well health-wise, probably the last time I see my father. I did completion visits and conversations. And now here I am back with my beloved bride, Connie Barlow, who's my soulmate, my mission partner. She's, you know, I don't feel alone in this collapsed trust world. I've got Connie. So being back here in Ypsilanti, living a simple life, walking everywhere, and just trying to do whatever I can do on a day-by-day basis, you know, and promoting collapse acceptance and collapse trust, and, you know, encouraging people to find ways to be a contribution to each other, and also find ways of growing in their intimacy with the natural world. That gives me so much life to do that, that frankly, I don't need much of anything else, because I've got all of that in place. So yeah, mostly just that.
Thank you.
And
Thank
having
you for-
colleagues like you and
Mm.
Jordan and Karen and, you know, others who are in this doom, post-doom collapse, you know, there's just so many good people doing great work. And I appreciate what you're doing. And I just wish you lots of success in this collapse club.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'd like to thank the people who've joined us, Gary and Sandy and Wendy's here, people who watched live. So thank you all for dropping by. Michael Dowd, postdoom.com. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you,
This
Dave.
is Collapse Club. I am David Baum in Seattle. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Until we meet again, farewell.
Thanks, brother.